Embarrassing moments is often I don't think anything like me, sometimes it takes me a bit of a while to, I have distanced myself from those moments, so it takes me a bit of a while to want to think about them again. I've had a few. One of my more recent ones, one of the things about being a dad of teenagers is you want to be cool. Like you do, you don't want your kids to be embarrassed by you. And it's really tough if you've got to take your kid to dancing lessons, because I just feel so out of place. So I was really grateful when this year Sophie decided not to do it again. And last year we took it to the Just Dance place down the road, and I was there early. I miss cafes. I hate this cafe. It's when you've got to hang around with all these people that know what they're doing in the dance studio and look really comfortable. And we like, it feels like I'm out of space. And anyway, I remember finally after it felt like an eternity. It probably wasn't, but it felt like an eternity. Sophie was ready to come, and I remember thinking, okay, it's all good. We're good. And I walked out of the dance studio, and it's crazy down there. Like there's cars going everywhere, and it's all mums on a mission, like people who've got it. Anyway, there were these cars going past. I had to get across the what seemed like a freeway, which was actually the car park between them. So I stopped the traffic, and I said, "So it's okay, come with me." And there was a line of like I think 4 or 5 cars watching as I very carefully stepped out, and Canada is a health hazard. And like it's not so, like if it's cold ice, it's not that bad because like it hurts. But when it's like ice on the top of like a puddle of water, and you get up and your pants look like you've had another kind of accident. And your daughter's looking horrified to be near you. It's like, oh man, I think I have scarred my kids in many, many ways, but the odd embarrassing one, there's other ones. Part of the reason we start talking about embarrassing moments is because we actually want to start by talking about, we're taking this journey to work out what does it mean to grow as a person? What does it mean to actually, remember we talked about the self-concept last week with Paul, and that it's such an important insight that you are not who you think you are, but who you think you are sets an agenda. It is the filter through which you interpret reality. And so when you got up this morning and decided what clothes you put on, that decision was based on your self-concept. Or if you're like me, you've only got 1 or 2 choices, so it doesn't really. The brand of car you choose, or when you go supermarket shopping, and you choose a brand of toothpaste. All these things, the people you fall in love with, or the people you get most frustrated about. One of the bewildering things about watching American politics at the moment is that it is like looking at 2 different countries, but they're both filtering each other out, and so they're just living in parallel universes, largely reinforced by media and all kinds of things. But they filter the data about the country in completely different ways. They look at the same sets of numbers about economics and crime and all that sort of stuff and have 2 completely different stories based on their self-concepts. And so do you. And so we need to learn what does it mean to step outside. Like you'll notice there's a quote in the self-relationship notes from a guy called Hugh Mackay, who I'll quote a bit in the course, And he says one way of describing the self-concept is like a cage. Now, we all need the cage, because if you didn't have a filter, you imagine if you had to think about all the data that bombards you every day. One kind of understanding of the autism spectrum is people often having an inadequate filter. And so autistic people really find if you move a clock in a room or something, it'll be challenging because it's harder sometimes for them to filter stuff. Now, people are still trying to understand autism as a whole spectrum, but you need a filter. But growth is learning, be able to say, that's not me. This is me, this is not me. And increasingly becoming free to be the person God created you to be. Which we're going to talk more about as we take this journey together. As part of that, we want to talk about the places where that is most easy to happen. And we're going to do that by contrasting the places where it's least easy to happen. The places where you are self-conscious are the places where you are least likely to be able to grow. That makes sense, doesn't it? And we focus that by talking about embarrassment because embarrassment is just like an intense version of self-consciousness. When you know someone is trying to sell you something, how do you feel? Pardon?
Skeptical.
Skeptical?
You're irritated.
Irritated? Yep. If generally speaking, when you know that there's an ulterior motive at play, that will help move you towards self-consciousness. That generally speaking, and self-consciousness is kind of like you see, sort of this gets it's when you freeze up around when your picture of yourself isn't like when you're trying to be the cool dad and it's not working. When the picture you believe about yourself or want to believe about yourself isn't coming across how you want it to believe, you want it to work, you will generally feel self-conscious. Similarly, when you enter a group for the first time, self-consciousness takes a lot of energy. It's what you probably can't even remember it, but I mentioned on the first night that one of the reasons you don't remember people's names, unless you've learned a few techniques, is that in the first 5 minutes of any conversation, you're not actually listening to what they're saying. It doesn't. It's in one ear and out the other. You are focused sort of between here and here on them, looking for any flicker, and the big agenda is to know whether you're accepted or not. And so there's a process thing going on. Now there are techniques. If you mention people's names back to them, salesmen learn the techniques to remember people's names. But generally speaking, when people introduce themselves to you to start with, because we are normally self-conscious, it is normal not to remember people's names. That is, if you're good at remembering people's names, don't feel bad. That's actually really good. Just unusual, that's all. I think we need to contrast self-consciousness with the moments, if you think about the times in your life where you have actually discovered things about yourself, where you've actually grown. I'll bet you that there are times where you've not been worried about how you're coming across. Where you feel accepted and free and able to say whatever is coming into your head and your heart. Does that make sense? They are the 3 a.m. conversations. I used to love the 3 a.m. conversations. Leanne and I used to have them all the time before we were married.
Then we got sensible.
Yeah, actually, the day after our wedding, we never again had a 3 a.m. conversation. But we do have lots of great conversations. But those conversations, you know what I'm talking about, where you lose track of time. Around a campfire often is a great place where you just where you're free. And we call that self-awareness. And it's when you're relaxed. You see the self-concept is relaxed. And you're not worried about how you're coming across. And the energy that you would normally spend, self-consciousness takes a lot of energy. Paul and I will talk more about this next week. But how do you feel after the first half hour when you go to a wedding and you're sitting with people who you don't really know or particularly like? It's exhausting, isn't it? Because self-consciousness takes a lot of energy. Worrying about, am I saying the right things? Is my fly done up? Don't you hate when someone mentions that? Because all of a sudden someone's trying to check. Am I doing the wrong thing? Am I doing the right thing? Guys, to be honest, if it's okay to be honest, coming into being a pastor, the first 6 months, I was acutely self-conscious often because I was so far out of my comfort zone. And whenever people would say, Pastor Matt, I'd be looking around and say, who are you talking about? But it's there is this thing, when you are able to relax, you are more able to grow. And I think this is a fairly important insight for us to learn in terms of if we're really wanting to create the space for people to get to know Jesus, then we are actually going to need to create the space for people to be able to relax and be real with each other. One of the mistakes I think we've made is bringing too much business thinking into the church and thinking we had to learn a sales pitch. One of the things David will introduce you to tonight is we don't have to pretend. If everybody's created in the image of God, then there's part of them that already knows. The task of evangelism is to help them get their own hearts. So we actually need to think differently in terms of what the job of mission is. It's not just about communicating concepts. That's not the job. In fact, one of the things we will assert in this course is one of the most effective tools in evangelism is listening. And that's why this is the only subject in the course that we take 2 units on. We're going to talk about it tonight, and then Dave will unpack it more on Saturday, this coming Saturday. Just a reminder, here at 9:30, and the lunch is going to be fantastic. So let me tell you, and the snacks on top. I love this quote by a Christian leader. He says, "To listen another's soul into a condition of disclosure and discovery may be almost the greatest service that any human being performs for another." Do you get what I'm saying? To listen another person's soul into a condition of disclosure and discovery may be almost the greatest service one human being does for another. As a young bloke, I wanted to change the world. I still do. I made lots of mistakes, and still do. But one of the things I have learnt along the way is changing the world is actually very easy. All you need to do is really listen to one person a week, really, and the world will actually change. It is that big a deal because we're terrible at it. We are not good at understanding what each other's worlds are like. A fellow called Paul Tillich is another one of those writers that people talk about a bit. He says, "Love listens, it is its first task to listen. No human relation, especially no intimate one, is possible without mutual listening. We were at the mission pastors meeting today talking about one of the great challenges for all these Syrian refugees coming to Canada, because they're used to growing up in communal societies, and we are such an individualistic society here. One of the measures of that, I've already talked about how the stats indicate that Vancouver is one of the loneliest places on the planet, despite the fact that it's one of the most sociologically connected, technologically connected places. One way of measuring it is this question. You don't have to do it, but imagine, like there's space there in your notes if you want to do it. If I could get you to write down on the paper that's in front of you the names of people who actually know what life is like for you. I wonder how long your list would be. You get the question? To write down on a piece of paper, you can do it in your imagination if you want, the names of people you would say actually know what life is like for you. I think it's a good question. How many people in the room would have more than 10 names on a list like that? More than 5? More than 3? Okay, I'll stop there. That list measures the level at which you feel you're being listened to, or the level at which you're actually experiencing community. That list is a demonstration of why a course like this is a good idea. As we talk about what does it actually mean to live what the Bible's talking about. Because Jesus talks about us having the kinds of relationships that are like him and the Father, where just as you are in me and I'm in you, that they may be in us and that their life may reflect our life. But community doesn't happen accidentally, and listening doesn't happen accidentally. We'll talk more about it, but James, I like the book of James. This is very straight up and down. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everybody should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Usually we kind of reverse the order a bit, don't we? He says this should be the values of our human relationships. Now, there are those people who think they are good listeners who have never actually had, never stopped to reflect much, and people who sort of grew up thinking they were wonderful at fixing people up. Generally speaking, the people who believe they were born good listeners aren't. Because listening never happens accidentally, and listening is not actually a spiritual gift. We'll talk more about that. But there are a couple of kinds of listening. I want to talk about this. There is, and most of us, when we do go to listen, this is kind of what we mean. We're using this word technically here, and sympathy comes from the two Greek words sun and pathos, sort of with feeling, and it literally means to feel the same as or to feel alongside of. So it's kind of this picture that, if your world's over here, my world's over here, and I kind of imagine I know what your world is like because my world is kind of similar to your world. So if you broke a leg, then I'll know what life is like for you because I broke my arm. Have you ever had anybody say to you, I know exactly how you feel? Yep. And how do you feel when someone says, I know exactly how you feel?
Angry.
Irritated.
Yeah. Often people are doing it with the best will in the world, but we've got to say this, and we've got to understand, in terms of relationships, you don't. You don't know how somebody else feels. Unless you take the real time to let them tell you what's going on for them. And even then, you'll only be getting part of the story. Because most of us find it hard to even express what's going on for us. I normally at this point say, I don't care if you're a twin. But because we have a twin in the room, I'll avoid. But we don't, like, you don't know what the experience, what life is actually like for your twin. Even if you grew up in the same family. Your experience of life has been unique. And we need, but what, how, we know that intellectually, but what we think when we come to our relationships, I teach this stuff. But I still, when Leanne says something, I still think she means what I would be meaning if I said it. And mostly, I'm wrong. That is sympathy, where you project your world on somebody else and assume. And most of us spend most of our time in our relationships sort of projecting our home movies on each other without actually getting past to work out what's actually going on. That's different to. I love this. Is one of my favourite quotes from. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is one of my heroes, and he wrote a book. He said, "Look, we've got to change how we teach pastors, but let's get them together in real relationships and having real fights with each other, and actually live the faith in a real practical kind of way." Then he wrote a book about the experiment called Life Together, and one of the things he says is, many people seek a sympathetic ear and do not find it among Christians. Because these Christians are talking even when they should be listening. Those who cannot listen long and patiently will always be talking past others and finally won't even notice it. Those who think their time is too precious to spend listening will never really have time for God and others, but only for themselves and their own words and plans. It's pretty direct, isn't it? This is a guy who's trying to teach pastors and saying Christians are hopeless at listening. And what he's saying is, if you don't develop the skill of listening, your world is going to be small. You'll continually miss what's actually happening. And it's scary because that, for many of us, is just day-to-day life. You see, the thing is beautiful. The picture, the early church, they were one in heart and mind. I think we're on a journey to rediscover what does it actually mean to be the body of Christ. I don't think it's an accident, and we'll talk more about this in the course, that 1 Corinthians 12 comes before 1 Corinthians 13. Paul says, you're all different, so you better learn to love each other. 1 Corinthians 12 is all, you're one body with many parts. And then 1 Corinthians 13, this is what love is. And we're going to spend a bit of time talking about that. But right up front, we can't relate to each other unless we learn to listen to each other. I know, I think I've said this, I lose track of what I've said and where I've said it. But I know when Leanne and I are having the worst fights, and I believe she's the most evil, in those moments, I'm not actually talking to her. I'm talking to the Leanne that's in my head. I'm not actually. Whenever I get past the Leanne that's in my head to her heart, she is beautiful and she's courageous. And I am so grateful to be married to that woman. But there are times where I am sympathetic and I'm talking past her. And I've got to get past the Leanne that's in my head and rediscover who Leanne actually is. And that's empathy. Empathy comes from the Greek words into and pathos, and the outcome of empathetic listening is that the person being listened to will be able to say, you appreciate what my experience feels like to me. You know what my world feels like to me. That's what empathetic listening produces. So it's kind of, if Leanne's world is here, it is, I take the time to actually enter her world and then come out of it. Like you can't spend your whole life in empathetic listening, you'll die, you know. It takes a lot of energy. Because, as we're going to talk more about, we're wired, because of our self-concept, to be self-focused. We're going to work against that. It's always a conscious choice to choose against your own self-interest to enter the world of another person and imagine perhaps that they might see the world differently to you. It's interesting, a lot of people who are watching America at the moment are saying that the big challenge America faces is how do we help both sides listen to each other? How do we help them talk with a common language? How do we help them realise they're both human beings? But it's easier to talk to a stereotype. And it's easier to, you know, there's actually people who are specialists in a particular kind of politics called wedge politics, where they, Stephen Harper actually imported an Aussie who helped our Prime Minister get elected a number of times, and I'm glad it didn't work. But basically, you find an enemy, create a stereotype about them, and get everybody to talk about how bad they are. And I am the only one who can save you from them. It's kind of this, that's how you win enough. It's how you win 51% of the vote. That's all you need. It's a really unhealthy way to do politics. In the book To Kill a Mockingbird, Little Scout says, you never really know a man until you understand things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. The flip side to the question of how many people are listening to you is this. Imagine I get you to turn the page over and ask you this question. How many people do you know what life is like for? And I'd encourage you, if you think that there's a whole bunch, I'd encourage you to go and ask them, do you think I know what life is like for you? And just do a reality check. Because my kids tell me that the times where I think I know them are usually the times where we're most far apart. You know, there are things I can predict about my kids, and I think there are things I know about them more than. Did you ever say to your kids, I know you better than you know yourself? my parents said that to me, and I swore I'd never say it. Never did. And I had the same result. But I even with my kids, who I've seen growing up from, these beautiful little babies who I was going to, make sure never had anything happen badly to them. I remember walking Maddie out of the hospital and being really angry the cars drove past because there was carbon monoxide in it. We'll talk more about that. But I realised one of the things for me as a dad is I've actually got to get inside the skin of my 14-year-old daughter and understand what it means for her to be talking about moving back to Australia. Or my 21-year-old daughter who's now on the other side of the planet, 13,583 kilometres away. Well, that's what it was, earlier today. And as she steps out and finds her, I've got to work to understand what life is like from her perspective. Does that make sense? I will only do that if I learn to listen to them. And as I learn to listen to them, they will then have the space to grow. Part of the reason listening is such a gift is it helps us become self-aware. It helps us relax and helps us be able to know more of what's going on. If you ever go and study psychology, helping people stuff, you'll come across this guy. His name's Carl Rogers. And he basically came up with all this empathetic listening stuff in terms of the language. But what he said is this, and it's kind of technical language, but what he says is, we can say that when a person finds himself sensitively and accurately understood, he develops a set of growth-promoting or therapeutic attitudes towards himself. This is back in the 50s, so he didn't use gender-inclusive language. Sorry about that. But do you get what he's saying? That when someone finds themselves understood, it actually changes how you view yourself, and you're more able to grow. You can step out of your self-concept for just a moment. And empathetic, can you see what's happening? Empathetic listening produces self-awareness, which produces growth. And as you relax, your spirit is freer. David's going to be talking about your spirit in the next session. Your spirit is freer to tell you what reality actually is. That's why listening is such a big deal. At one level, it's so simple. But at another level, we really often, I was saying today, we're talking about the mission pastors and the future of the church and stuff, and I really believe, the more I study the Bible and the more I study church history, I really believe the church is meant to be a miracle. You're meant to look at the church and go, how on earth do those people hang it together? How do they like each other? Because they're so different. And from the very first days of the church, there were fights about, the Greek women who weren't being looked after, and how do we, and all these different ethnic groups coming together, and how do we do it? And Jesus says this: it's by this will all men know that you are my disciples, that you love each other. And it is not possible to love each other unless we listen to each other. So we need to, one of the things I'm going to say, I'll say it now. Empathic listening, as I said, is not a gift. It is always a choice. I teach this stuff. That doesn't mean I'm going to make the choice to listen. As Leanne will tell you. It is always a discipline. It is always a choice to choose against your natural self-interest. It takes energy. And there is a skill. There are skill elements involved. If there are things you can do to make listening more effective, and things you can do to make listening less effective. And so we're going to talk about the skill side of it. And we're actually on Saturday. We're going to. It's actually often one of the most profound units of the course, because all we do is just listen to each other. It's not rocket science, but we actually take some time to listen to each other, and we'll be doing that on Saturday. And I think you'll find. Anyway, I won't preempt it too much, but it's not complicated. Just around the tables. When was the last time you felt deeply listened to? Who was the listener, and what kinds of things did they do to help you feel listened to? Just have a chat about that. Just wanting to reel it back in. Did you notice as you talked about, when what made a good listener or whatever? Any themes emerge at all, or anything? Did anything emerge from that brief discussion? nodding over there.
Disagreement.
Tell us, what do you mean by that?
You know, when the person I talk to the most, usually other than my wife, is my father, and you know, we get into disagreements sometimes, but we always come back to the same point where we start talking again, and you know, it's good for us.
So there's enough trust that
Yeah.
you can disagree
Yeah.
and then still come back. So trust and the ability to think, to know that it's okay to say something that they may not agree with is actually pretty important.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. Is that true for others? Yeah. So it's okay to think differently to them. Anyone else? What have you noticed about what has been helpful in terms of when you've been listened to?
When people look at you and they focus on you, then I feel that they're actually listening to me.
Yeah.
When they look away or their eyes flutter or whatever, then I know that they're just letting me go, letting me babble.
Yeah, absolutely. So eye contact really matters when you listen to someone.
Exactly.
It's really challenging when you're a pastor in the lobby. People coming through because you're having this conversation. This person over there wants you to acknowledge them, and that person you're trying to. Anyway, I'm still learning. I'm not very good at it. But the eye contact really matters. Yeah, and knowing that you have their attention. So a few things. Anything else?
If a friend says to you, like, I'd love to know how that went for you, or they actually ask, and then I feel like they've made space for you to talk.
Yeah.
Then it's kind of like, it doesn't matter if you talk for 3 minutes or 10 minutes or like, then it's okay because they give you permission.
So there's something about giving permission to say they actually want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
I really want to encourage you to think about what does it mean for you between here and Saturday to actually intentionally listen to somebody. That's part of your homework. I'm now going to run through. We'll probably bring these back up as we on Saturday as we talk more about it. But here are some of the things to keep in mind when it comes to listening. Some of the more skilled things that are involved in listening. Right up front. So we're assuming that that you are the listener and not the person being listened to. I encourage you, when you feel like you've been listened to well, take time to reflect on what's been helpful about that. Why do I feel like I've been listened to by that person? It's good to reflect on this. But as we said, I want to come back. Listening is a choice. It's always a choice. Like I said, it's possible to teach this stuff and not do it. It's a discipline where there's a withholding. You discipline yourself to listen, and it is a skill. Just because you want to listen doesn't mean you're going to be effective at listening. So to listen well, here are some of the skill things to be conscious of. If you really want to listen to someone, the first thing is you need to suspend judgment. Like we're just hearing, it has to be okay for them to say things you don't agree with. And for you to get behind what they're saying. If you're really wanting to listen to them. If you're wanting to fix them up, then just tell them that and don't pretend to listen. But if you're wanting to listen, you need to suspend judgment. Doesn't mean you never move to judgment, but you need to, in the listening, you need to be able to hold back enough to hear what's behind their words. Does that make sense? You need to resist the distraction often. One of the great challenges whenever you're listening to someone is they'll say something that triggers something for you. Like if someone talks about U2, I'm off. And there are things, like if someone talks about American politics, it's really hard for me not to go, okay, let's talk about American politics. There will be trigger words that trigger you off on rabbit trails, and then all of a sudden you've grabbed hold of the conversation. Does that make sense? Or there may be emotional trigger words that trigger memories and other stuff, and you actually have to be conscious of that and not inject yourself. So there'll be cues that you need to hold back from. Does that make sense? You need to listen for the total meaning. or if you're trying to win an argument with your wife, don't. I just hold her to the exact verbatim words and completely ignore what she's trying to say. That's how I try and win my arguments, and it hasn't worked yet, but I'll keep trying. You need to listen to what is actually being said. Not some of us are legalists, particularly us blokes like to get things in boxes and stuff, and people don't fit in boxes, and neither do conversations. Whenever you're listening, you listen to and listen for feeling. Like if someone says, "I feel really angry," that's the stuff about this, about Donald Trump. You don't ask a question about Donald Trump. You ask a question about the anger. Does that make sense? So when tell us about feeling angry. And so you respond to the feelings, because people live in their feelings, not in their opinions. Does that make sense? So if you want to have a discussion about opinions, that's fine, but you'll never get to know someone. You listen for the feeling words, and the feelings are the clue as to where people actually live. And sometimes they won't even verbalise their feelings. You'll just tell. They stiffen up or tear, you get a bit misty-eyed as they talk about the Oilers, or whatever. So watch for the feelings. Just be conscious of all the cues. Like Leanne now knows, like if I'm thinking about saying something, like she picks up the cue. When, I don't know exactly what it is, but she says, yeah. I haven't decided to say anything yet, but she knows I'm... But there are all kinds of cues, body language, tone of voice, and so be conscious to be not just listening to the words, but noting all the cues that tell you. Sometimes, just in passing about the feeling thing too, eye contact generally speaking, when you're listening to someone, eye contact intensifies or at least continues the current feelings going on in the conversation. And so if you're wanting to really hear and really understand what's going on, then maintain eye contact. Sometimes it's good to actually look away if it's getting a bit too intense, and give people a chance to regroup. So it's part of the thing about feelings. And one of the real skills that I remember the first time, I can't remember what it was we were having a fight about. And I didn't realise it was a fight. But I remember, I think we were talking about a car or something, and you got really upset. I was talking about to my wife, obviously. And I remember saying to you, what do you think I've just said? And sometimes I'm just clueless, often. And Leanne heard me when I said, and it was such a helpful thing to say. And it's one of the things we have to learn to reflect back your understanding of what's being said. Because I said, look, I thought we were talking about car, and what Leanne had heard me say something about me not liking her in the discussion about a car. Does that make sense? So that's not a great example of reflect. Yeah. Sure. Probably. But generally speaking, one of the great tools of listening is to reflect back what the person has just said in a way that kind of even just really just boringly restates it. So someone says, like, I'm really feeling frustrated. But even if you don't know anything else to say, just say, so you're feeling frustrated? That's enough. And so you just reflect back, or if they've gone on about a trip to Disneyland that was a completely waste of time, or so then try and summarise. So I think I've heard you saying the trip to Disneyland was a waste of time. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And so reflect back the understandings. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Some of the things an effective listener does. An effective listener looks and sounds interested in the speaker, even if they're not. No. An effective listener looks and sounds interested in, is conscious about how you're coming across, like Deb was saying. An effective listener really tries to understand what life is like from their point of view. And so this is, I guess, a parent, it's just so, you come home at the end of the day, it's been a day of work full of people, and your 14-year-old is there, and to actually stop and say, okay, what is life like for you, won't accidentally happen. Like it's always a conscious choice to try and see things from Sophie's point of view for me. You will never actually accidentally listen to somebody. It'll always be a conscious. They might feel like you're listening to them accidentally, but you won't actually be listening to them until you consciously choose to listen. An effective listener clarifies the speaker's thoughts and feelings. So, if someone is, saying, "Look, I'm really frustrated with Donald Trump," so you just say, "So, I think I'm hearing you saying you're really concerned and frustrated about Donald Trump. Is that right?" And all you're doing is just clarifying what they're saying. Does that make sense? So, one of the great tools of listening is just clarification. And then reflecting back the thoughts and feelings. There's actually some examples there, I think, from memory. This is one of the great challenges for me, is it can be a bit scary, because you can think, well, what am I meant to be saying next? You've got to let go of that question, and you've actually got to respond. And if you don't have anything to say next, that's great, that's fine, just leave it dead air. Don't panic. Usually, most helpfully, there will be space. Sometimes it can feel like an eternity when you're trying to listen and developing the skill. But what is actually happening, people are going down inside and working out what's going on for them. And it is actually good to create space. So you respond if you're going to listen rather than lead the conversation. When you are leading a conversation, when you've got an outcome in mind, it's appropriate in lots of settings, but just know you're not listening. Does that make sense? And again, responding to feelings rather than the content. There's more in your notes there you can unpack. And there's the actual techniques of active listening. These are some of the things. These are some of the skills that gradually encourage you to reflect on and on Saturday have a crack at putting into practice. Conscious non-verbal reinforcement. What do you reckon that means? Yeah. Yeah, that too. Yeah. Yeah. Eye contact, nodding. How we all know that you're with them. That is actually a skill. It means you have to actually be conscious of what your body is doing when you're listening. Another skill is summarising. Okay, we've just had a long discussion about this. This is my sense of what we've just said. Does it make sense? Clarifying questions, and I think there's some examples there in your notes to bounce off. Reflecting feelings back to someone. So, did you know that when you started to talk about this, your voice rose a bit, and you seemed to get a bit more angry. Did you notice that? Or that just really important. Validating. Not you don't have to validate everything they're saying, but validating people as people. Like, so. It's important. Particularly if someone is, that one of the things that's really important to understand is there is not anybody who you will listen to who is not beautiful. I really don't have time for anybody who says they can't get on with someone. That's to do with their own immaturity. There is no one on this planet who ultimately, when you get through all the layers, is not beautiful. But sometimes many of us have been hurt, and trusting someone with truth is a big deal. And so validating them as people is actually a really important skill to learn, if that makes sense. And encouraging along that kind of line, and this is a really important one, asking open-ended questions. Again, there's examples there if you look up in your notes. I encourage you to read over them and reflect. These are some of, we'll talk more about it, but these are some of the actual skills of listening that you won't do accidentally. And like I said, unless there is a significant mental illness that is getting the road, and even then, but there is not a person on the planet, if you can peel back the layers, and if you can get to a point of honesty, who you will not find beautiful. Because every person on this planet is created in the image of God, and God doesn't make junk. And you've got to understand, this is why listening is so powerful. Because, pick up what Carl Rogers is saying, as we listen to someone, they start to think about themselves in a different way, and they start to grow. You actually don't have to fix them up. You know, in an environment where it's normal to listen, it's also normal to grow. Let's be honest, we're all on a journey. Let's not beat ourselves up about, being bad listeners or good listeners. We're all on. I think part of what Jesus is wanting to do in his church is to build us as a community. And part of that is relearning some of these basic skills that the New Testament talks about. But they're not just abstract ideas, they're very practical. Now, we actually have to learn how to love each other, even though we're different. And I really do believe, one of the I think there are theological understandings we need to come to, and that they're important. But most of the stuff that holds us back is this really basic stuff of realising it's okay to be different, but we've got to learn to listen to each other, and we've got to learn to engage in conflict, which we'll talk about more next week, and give each other feedback. But this is the nitty gritty of starting to what does it mean to grow. So. Just around your tables for about 3 minutes. Just one or two words around the table. What do you think God is wanting you to hear out of this session tonight? Just one or two words, not a long sentence, but and then we'll get one person at the table to pray. Just for that, and I really want you to take this homework seriously for the next. You've got till Saturday morning, so that's a good,
day and a half.
30 hours or something. I want you to try and listen to one person over the next 30 hours. So just sharing briefly, what is it God want you think Jesus might wanting you to hear from this session, and then one person praying for you. Then we'll take a break. Then David will be coming with one of the more, I keep saying one of the better units of the course, but it is a pretty special unit.